My family borrowed my inheritance to save their failing business. Years later, I made them repay every cent with interest. You know that horrible hollow feeling when you realize your whole future was spent by other people, and you never even got to touch the money? It doesn't feel real at first. You feel like there must be some mistake, some missing detail, some button someone can press to reverse it. That's how I felt standing in a cramped, greasy restaurant office, staring at the people I'd trusted all my life, while they told me almost casually that the money my grandparents left me was gone. But to understand how we got there, you need to see where I started. Because this story doesn't begin with a bank app or a legal document. It begins with a little girl in a diner booth, being trained to put family above herself so early that by the time they stole from me, I almost believed they had the right. I grew up in that restaurant. And when I say grew up, I mean, I took my first steps between tables. My homework sat on sticky menus. My birthday candles were stuck into free slices of pie, with happy birthday written in chocolate syrup. From the outside, it probably looked warm and charming, one of those, we're all family here kind of places. The walls were covered in faded photos of my grandparents when they first opened, newspaper clippings about local heroes, and old Polaroids of customers who'd been coming for decades. Everyone in town knew my family by name. They'd say things like, "Your folks work so hard, and this place is your legacy. Kiddo, you're lucky." Lucky. That's the word people always use when they see a family business from the outside. They don't see what it's like inside. I don't remember a time when the restaurant wasn't the first priority. If the school called, we'll be there after lunch rush. If I had a recital, we'll try to make it. But if it's busy, you know how it is. If I was sick, can you at least sit in the booth and roll silverware? There was always a reason the restaurant needed us more than anything else. As I got older, that turned into a script that played on repeat. We all pitch in. We sacrifice for each other. You're part of this whether you like it or not. I started bussing tables before I was legally allowed to have a job. At first, I thought it was normal. I didn't know other kids weren't spending Thanksgiving refilling coffee for strangers while their teachers sat at other tables with their families. I'd watch my classmates at the same school, with the same teachers, but completely different lives. They'd talk about sports practice, sleepovers, vacations. I'd talk about burning my hand on the fryer. But I told myself, it's okay. This is temporary. You're helping now, and later you'll have your own life. Because in the background, there was always this one thing giving me hope. The college money. It wasn't something I invented. The adults talked about it. If my mother was freaking out about bills, my grandparents would say, "Don't worry, the college fund is separate. That's off limits." If I stressed over grades, someone would say, "You've got the fund, you'll be okay." They never gave me exact numbers, but it sounded like this invisible safety net with my name on it. I remember the very first time I heard it mentioned directly. I was 12. My grandparents had picked me up from school because my mother was stuck at the restaurant, short-staffed again. We stopped by a bank on the way back. I stayed in the car, bored, watching people go in and out. When they came back, my grandfather got into the driver's seat and turned to my grandmother with this tired but satisfied smile. "That's one more chunk set aside," he said. "She'll be okay." "Who?" I asked. "You," my grandmother said, turning to look at me. "We're putting something away for when you're older. For school. For getting started. So you're not stuck living in this place like we did." Those words lodged themselves in my brain. Not stuck like we did. At 12, I didn't fully get it. I just knew they were doing something quietly, on purpose, to make sure I had a way out. As I got older, that something got clearer. They'd sit me down sometimes after closing, the whole place dark except for the lights over the counter, and talk about life. My grandfather would rub his back and say, "We built this from nothing, but we don't want you to live and die in here. This was our dream. You're allowed to have a different one." I'd nod, feeling guilty and relieved at the same time. Because the dirty truth was, I didn't love the restaurant. I didn't love the smell. I didn't love the chaos. I didn't love that every holiday was just another busy day. I didn't love watching my mother come home with aching feet, collapsing on the couch, too tired to be a person. I wanted something else. I didn't even know exactly what. Just, not this. They saw that. They saw it before anyone else did. When I mentioned wanting to go to university, they didn't say, "Who do you think you are?" They said, "Good. That's why we've been saving." There was one night that became burned into my memory. We were closing. Chairs upside down on tables, mop water dirty, the fryer finally quiet. It was just me and my grandfather. "You know we've put aside some money for you, right?" he asked, without looking up from the cash drawer. "Yeah," I said. "Mom calls it the fund." His mouth tightened. "It's not the fund," he said. It's your fund. Your grandmother and I set it up. It has your name on it. It's not for this place. It's for whatever gets you out of here if you want out. Out sounded dramatic, like escaping a prison. But I knew what he meant. Then he did something that, looking back, changed everything. He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the counter. Inside was a copy of the will and a note with an account number. "Keep this somewhere safe," he said. "Just in case anyone misremembers what we wrote after we're gone." I laughed a little. Why would they misremember? He looked tired in a way I didn't fully understand then. "People get funny around money," he said. "Especially when they're scared. I trust them to love you. I don't always trust them to do the hard, right thing when they're desperate." He made me look him in the eye. "If this restaurant ever tries to swallow that money," he said, "you fight it. Don't let them guilt you. That's not what this is for." "I promise," I said. I meant it. I believed I'd never be in a situation where I had to use that promise against my own family. Then he got sick. Then she got sick. And suddenly, the restaurant wasn't just a tiring place we all worked at. It was a monster that needed to be fed with more money, more time, more energy because now there were medical bills too. I watched my grandparents shrink. My grandmother's voice got softer. My grandfather's hands shook. But even then, every time I visited them in the hospital or at home, they'd ask, "You still thinking about school? You still keeping those grades up?" They'd talk about my future like it was this thing out on the horizon, waiting for me. They never once said, "You know, we might need that fund for other things." Not once. The very last conversation I had with my grandfather, he was too weak to stand. I was sitting at the edge of his bed. The room smelled like antiseptic. He took my hand and squeezed it weakly. "You remember that account?" he whispered. I nodded, throat tight. "That's your escape hatch," he said. "Not a life raft for the restaurant. Don't let them use it as a bandage. I know your mother loves this place. I know she'll go down with the ship if she has to. But you get to swim away. You hear me?" I nodded again, tears in my eyes. "Say it," he insisted. "I won't let them use it for the restaurant," I said. "I promise." He smiled. Just a little. Good girl. He died a week later. My grandmother went a few months after that. And then, like in every family drama, there were the meetings. The will was read. Papers were signed. Grown-ups had serious discussions around tables while I sat in the corner, quiet, trying to process that two of the only people who ever told me I was allowed to leave this life were gone. The lawyer read the part about me. "To our granddaughter, we leave the contents of account, to be used for her education or starting a life independent of the family business. This is her gift alone." Everyone nodded. Someone said, "Of course. That's what they wanted." Someone else said, "We'll make sure she's taken care of." Nobody told me the exact number. But I was 17 and grieving and tired, and I told myself, they're adults. They'll handle it. The money is there when you need it. I had the account number and will copy tucked away. It felt like overkill. They were my family. Why would I ever need to use it against them? Life blurred after that. I graduated high school. I kept working at the restaurant because that's what we all did. It wasn't even a question. It was just expected. Then came the first round of college applications. I still remember the look on my mother's face when I told her I'd been accepted to a university 2 hours away. It wasn't pride. It was panic disguised as a smile. "That's amazing," she said, voice a little too high. "We're so proud. But it's not cheap. Maybe you could start local? Do community college for a bit? Help us out? Then transfer later? The restaurant is really struggling right now." I hesitated. In my head, I heard my grandparents. "Don't let this place decide your life." Out loud, I heard my mother. "We're struggling. We're family. We need you." And I did what I'd been trained to do my whole life. I put them first. "Okay," I said. "I'll defer for a year. Help out. Save up. Then I'll go." 1 year. That's what I told myself. 1 year turned into 2. The reasons changed, but the story stayed the same. We're just getting through a rough patch. Once we pay off this loan, we'll be okay. After we replace the fryer, things will smooth out. There was always a new after. Meanwhile, I was working double shifts, taking a few community college classes on the side, and watching classmates leave town while I stayed locked in the same loop. Every now and then, the inheritance would pop into my mind like a glitch in the Matrix. I'd be wiping down a table at midnight, exhausted, and think, "You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be on a campus somewhere right now. Remember? There's money for that." I started asking more direct questions. "So, about my college fund. How much is in there now?" The answers were always vague. "It's safe." It's invested. We can't just pull it all at once without penalties. You're too young to stress about that stuff. Focus on your classes. Can I see a statement? I asked. One night, voice shaking a little because even asking felt like a betrayal. The look I got could have cut glass. Do you not trust us? My mother asked. There it was. The weaponized question. I backed off. Again. Of course I trust you, I said. I was just curious. They relaxed. The conversation ended. Deep down, something felt wrong. But guilt is louder than suspicion when you've been raised to believe your value is how much you sacrifice. So I kept working. Kept waiting. Kept telling myself. They would never cross that line. They loved them too much. They love you too much. I was wrong. It took one email to blow the illusion apart. I was wrong. It took one email to blow the illusion apart. The subject line was stark, almost clinical. Final notice. Admission status update. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked it open. The words blurred at first, then sharpened into a cold, hard truth. Dear Ava. This is a final reminder regarding your deferred admission for the upcoming academic year. To secure your place, full payment of the first semester's tuition and fees, totaling $X, XXX, XX, must be received by date, 2 weeks from now. Failure to meet this deadline will result in the cancellation of your admission offer. We understand that financial planning can be challenging. Challenging. That was an understatement. My hands were shaking. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to come up with thousands of dollars. 2 weeks to either make my escape, or watch the last door slam shut. But it wasn't impossible. Not with the fund. The fund. The mythical, untouchable, always there, fund. This was it. This was the moment it was for. This was why my grandparents had worked so hard. Why they'd whispered promises to me from their deathbeds. This was my chance. I rehearsed the conversation in my head 100 times. I'd be calm. I'd be direct. I'd show them the email. They'd understand. They'd be proud. They'd finally release the money. And I'd be free. I walked into the restaurant that afternoon with a forced smile, trying to project an air of casual confidence. My mother was in the office, hunched over a stack of invoices, her brow furrowed. My uncle was, as usual, lounging in the visitor's chair, scrolling through his phone, a half-eaten plate of fries beside him. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the low hum of the kitchen. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Got some news. My mother grunted, not looking up. Good news, I hope. We could use some. It is good news, I said, holding up my phone, the university email glowing on the screen. The university sent a final notice. I just need to pay the tuition, and I'm in. For real this time. I expected a cheer. A hug. A finally. Instead, there was silence. My mother slowly pushed her chair back, the wheels squeaking on the worn linoleum. My uncle lowered his phone, his eyes narrowed. Tuition? My mother said, her voice flat. How much? I told her the amount. Another silence. Heavier this time. That's a lot, my uncle finally said, his tone dismissive. You sure you can't just do another year at community college? Save up a bit more? My carefully constructed calm began to fray. No, I said, my voice firmer than I intended. This is the deadline. If I don't pay, I lose my spot. This is what the fund is for, right? This is why Grandpa and Grandma saved it. My mother stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the alley behind the restaurant. Her back was to me. Ava, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's not that simple. My heart started to pound. This was the familiar script, the vague answers, the deflection. But this time, I couldn't back down. What's not simple? I asked, my voice rising. It's my money. It's for my education. It's literally written in the will. What's complicated about that? My uncle sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Look, kid. The restaurant hit a rough patch. A really rough patch. We had to make some tough decisions to keep the doors open. Your grandparents, God rest their souls. They would have wanted us to save the business. It's the family legacy. They wanted me to be independent of the family business. I shot back, the words my grandfather had whispered to me echoing in my ears. They said it was my escape hatch, not a life raft for the restaurant. My mother turned from the window, her face pale. We were drowning, Ava. Your father's medical bills, the rent, the suppliers threatening to cut us off. We panicked. We thought we'd put it back quickly. Then one bad month turned into 2, then 6. It got away from us. Put what back? I asked, a cold dread spreading through me. How much did you take? How much is left? My mother's eyes darted to my uncle. He avoided her gaze, picking at a loose thread on his shirt. How much is left? I repeated, my voice barely audible now. Each word felt like it was being dragged from a deep, dark well. My mother took a shaky breath. All of it, Ava. It's all been used. The world tilted. All of it? I whispered. You emptied my inheritance? The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My uncle finally looked at me, his face a mask of forced calm. It's not like we were buying yachts, Ava. We used it to cover payroll, the new fryer, the landlord's back rent. It went into the business. It's still here. It's just working for the family. It was never meant to work for the family in that way. I screamed, my voice cracking. It was meant for me. For my education. For my life. Grandpa told me. Don't let them use this for the restaurant. I promised him. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was sharp. We didn't have a choice. If this restaurant goes under, the whole family goes under. You think your grandparents would have wanted us to watch it die while your little nest egg sat there untouched? Yes! I yelled, the word tearing from my throat. That's exactly what Grandpa wanted. He told me with his own mouth. Don't let them use this for the restaurant. He made me promise. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. My uncle stood up, his face hardening. He talked a big game at the end, but come on. You think he'd really want his kids losing everything while his granddaughter sits on 70 grand doing nothing? It wasn't doing nothing, I cried, tears finally streaming down my face. It was waiting for me. For school. For my life. It was $70,000. And you stole it. Watch your mouth, Ava, my mother shouted, her own tears now flowing freely. We borrowed it. We always intended to put it back. On what terms? I demanded, stepping closer, my hands clenched into fists. What interest rate? What repayment schedule? Did you sign anything? Or did you just tell yourselves we'll figure it out later while you drained it dollar by dollar, knowing I had no idea? She faltered, her gaze dropping to the floor. Family doesn't need contracts. That's exactly when you need them the most, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because family is supposed to protect you, not steal your future. The silence that followed was deafening. The hum of the kitchen, the distant clatter of dishes, it all faded away. All I could hear was the ragged sound of my own breathing, and the echo of their betrayal. So that's it? I asked, the words tasting like ash. I don't get to go to university because you decided saving this place was more important than respecting Grandpa's will? More important than my life? My mother looked up, her face a mask of desperation. You can still go, Ava. Just later. When things are better. When the restaurant is back on its feet. I held up my phone, the university's final notice still on the screen. The deadline is in 2 weeks. I can't pay tuition with later. I can't pay it with empty promises. I can't pay it with a business that just ate my entire future. My uncle leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. You're 20. Plenty of kids work a few years, save up, go to school in their 20s. We all had to hustle. You're not special. Yeah? I said, my voice laced with venom. How many of them had their own family drain the one safety net that was supposed to make it easier? How many of them had their own grandparents' last wishes completely ignored by the people who were supposed to honor them? He shrugged, completely unbothered. You'll thank us when this place is thriving again. We're building something for you too. That was the moment it truly hit me. They didn't see it as theft. They didn't see it as a betrayal. They saw it as a necessary sacrifice, a redistribution of resources. They had convinced themselves that my grandparents' last act of independence, giving me a way out, was less important than one more desperate attempt to keep their failing dream alive. I walked out of that office without another word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a scene. I just walked. My legs felt like lead, my head light. The world outside the restaurant seemed too bright, too loud. I got into my beat-up car, started the engine, and drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I drove until the city lights faded into the dark, winding roads of the countryside. I pulled over on a deserted stretch, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. And I cried. I cried for the lost money. I cried for the lost trust. I cried for the naive girl who had believed in family first, and had her future stolen because of it. I cried for my grandparents, whose last wishes had been trampled. I cried until there were no more tears left. Then, in the quiet darkness, a cold, hard resolve began to set in. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I wasn't going to be the quiet, sacrificing daughter anymore. They wanted to call it a loan? Fine. I'd make them pay it back. Every single cent. With interest. And I knew exactly where to start. I cried until there were no more tears left. Then, in the quiet darkness, a cold, hard resolve began to set in. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I wasn't going to be the quiet, sacrificing daughter anymore. They wanted to call it a loan? Fine. I'd make them pay it back. Every single cent. With interest. And I knew exactly where to start. The next morning, I drove straight to the local library. I needed a computer, a printer, and a quiet corner where I could think. I pulled out the will, the account number, and the university's final notice. My hands still trembled, but my mind was clear. I wasn't acting on raw emotion anymore. This was strategy. First, I needed to confirm everything. I found the phone number for the bank where the account was held. After navigating an endless automated menu, I finally got a human on the line. "I'm calling about account number XXXXXX," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's an inheritance account. I'm the beneficiary." The woman on the other end was polite, but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this account was closed approximately 2 years ago. The funds were fully dispersed to the account holders at that time." Account holders, not beneficiary. My mother and uncle. They were the executors. They were the ones who had the legal authority to access the funds, even if the will explicitly stated they were for me. They had used their position to drain it. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, but it also solidified my resolve. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Next, I started researching. I looked up inheritance law, executor responsibilities, and what happens when a will's instructions are ignored. It was a rabbit hole of legal jargon, but one phrase kept jumping out at me. Breach of fiduciary duty. It meant they had a legal obligation to manage the money according to the will, and they had failed. Spectacularly. I knew I couldn't afford a lawyer to take them to court. Not yet, anyway. But I could get advice. I found a local legal aid clinic that offered free initial consultations. I booked the first available appointment. The lawyer was a kind, older woman with sharp eyes. I laid out my story. The will. The bank's confirmation. The university email. She listened patiently, taking notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is a clear case of misuse of funds, Ava," she said. "Your grandparents' wishes were explicit. As executors, your mother and uncle had a legal and ethical obligation to ensure those funds were used for your benefit, as stated in the will. They did not." My heart soared, then sank. "So, I can sue them?" She nodded slowly. "You could. You would likely have a very strong case. However, litigation is expensive, time-consuming, and incredibly damaging to family relationships. Even if you win, you might lose more than just money." "What are my other options?" I asked. "You could try to negotiate a repayment plan," she suggested. "Present them with the facts. Show them the will, the bank's confirmation. Explain the legal implications of their actions. Propose a structured way for them to repay you. Sometimes, the threat of legal action, combined with a clear path to resolution, is enough." She helped me draft a formal letter, outlining the facts and stating my intention to seek full repayment. She also gave me a template for a repayment agreement, including a reasonable interest rate. "This isn't about punishing them, Ava," she said. "It's about reclaiming what's yours and establishing boundaries. You have every right to do that." I left her office feeling a strange mix of fear and empowerment. I had a plan. I had the law on my side. But I also knew this was going to be the hardest conversation of my life. I spent the rest of the day refining the repayment plan. I didn't want to bankrupt them, but I wanted it to be significant enough that they felt the impact. I calculated the original amount, added a modest interest rate, and broke it down into monthly payments that, while challenging, were achievable if they tightened their belts. I also drafted a formal letter, concise and to the point, stating my intent to recover the full amount. It wasn't accusatory, but it was firm. It cited the will, the account closure, and the legal concept of fiduciary duty. I printed everything out. The will, the bank's confirmation, the lawyer's letter, my proposed repayment plan. I put it all in a neat folder. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect. It was about proving to myself, and to them, that I was not a child whose future could be casually discarded. The next morning, I walked back into the restaurant. The smell of frying bacon and stale coffee was the same. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen was the same. But I was different. I found my mother and uncle in the office, just as before. My mother was on the phone, her voice strained. My uncle was doing paperwork, looking stressed. The restaurant was clearly still struggling. I waited until my mother hung up. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm and steady. My mother sighed, rubbing her temples. "Ava, please. Not now. We just had a supplier threaten to cut us off. We're barely keeping our heads above water." "This is about keeping my head above water," I replied, placing the folder on the desk. "And it can't wait." My uncle looked up, his eyes narrowing. What's all this? This, I said, opening the folder, is the will. The one you ignored. I slid it across the desk. And this is confirmation from the bank that the account was closed 2 years ago. And the funds were dispersed to the account holders you two. I watched their faces. My mother's jaw tightened. My uncle's eyes flickered with a mix of anger and fear. We already talked about this, Ava, my mother said, her voice tight. We told you we used it for the business. We're sorry. What more do you want? I want what's mine, I said. And I want you to acknowledge, formally, that you took it. And then I want you to pay it back. I pushed the repayment plan across the desk. My uncle snatched it up, his eyes scanning the numbers. He scoffed. You're serious? You think we have this kind of money just lying around? You had it when you took it from my account, I replied, my voice unwavering. You found it then. You can find it now. This isn't a request. This is a demand. You're going to sue your own family? My mother whispered, her voice laced with hurt and disbelief. I'm going to enforce my grandparents' will, I corrected her. They trusted you to do the right thing. You didn't. So now I am. I pulled out the letter from the legal aid clinic. I've already consulted with a lawyer. They confirmed that your actions constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. I have a very strong legal case. I don't want to go to court. It will be expensive, public, and damaging for everyone. But I will, if you leave me no other choice. The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mother picked up the repayment plan, her hands trembling. She looked at the numbers, then at the will, then at me. The defiance slowly drained from her face, replaced by a profound weariness. Ava, she said, her voice barely audible. We were drowning. We thought we were saving everything. We thought we could put it back before you needed it. You gambled with my future, I said. And you lost. Now it's time to pay up. My uncle slammed his hand on the desk. This is ridiculous. You're going to destroy this family over money. You destroyed my future over money. I shot back, my voice rising. You took my chance at college. You took my independence. You took my trust. This isn't about destroying the family. This is about rebuilding what you broke. My mother looked at my uncle, then back at the repayment plan. She picked up a pen. I can't promise we'll never miss a payment, she said, her voice hoarse. But I can promise we'll try. Trying would have been not touching it in the first place, I said. But I didn't argue. A signed promise was better than none. She signed. Her signature was shaky, but it was there. My uncle hesitated, then snatched the pen and scrawled his name below hers, muttering under his breath. I took the signed agreement, folded it carefully, and placed it back in my folder. One more thing, I said, looking at them both. From now on, every shift I work here gets paid and documented. No more helping out for free. No more we'll pay you later. I'm done being an unpaid employee in a business that already ate my inheritance. My mother nodded slowly, her eyes still red. My uncle just glared. I walked out of that office, the folder clutched tight in my hand. The weight of it felt different now. It wasn't just a collection of papers. It was a shield. It was a weapon. It was my future, slowly being reclaimed. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. After they signed, people think I felt victorious. I didn't. I walked out of that office with the agreement in my hand and this sick, heavy feeling in my chest, like I'd just amputated something to save the rest of me. They had signed. They had agreed. But they were still my family. The first month's payment was due on the 15th. On the 13th, nothing. On the 14th, nothing. On the 15th, sometime after midnight, my phone buzzed. Incoming transfer. $120. Note. We're trying. It was laughably small compared to what they owed. But it was real. I opened my spreadsheet and typed it in. First payment. Balance reduced by one tiny step. 10 seconds of typing for years of damage. I stared at that number for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room and scream. Is this a joke? Another part of me remembered the lawyer's words. This isn't about punishing them. It's about reclaiming what's yours and establishing boundaries. So instead, I typed back. Received. Logged toward the total. Next due date is the 15th of next month. No thank you. No heart emoji. No guilt. Just business. If they wanted my inheritance to be in the business, I was going to treat them like the business they claimed to be. The next few months felt like walking a tightrope between two worlds. Inside the restaurant, nothing and everything had changed. I still showed up for my scheduled shifts. I still took orders, refilled drinks, wiped tables. Customers still called me sweetheart and asked about my grandparents. But I clocked in and out like a real employee now. Every hour I worked was logged. Every paycheck was written down. No more, "Can you just stay an extra 2 hours and we'll make it up to you later?" Later was how I lost $70,000. At home, the air was thick. My mother was quieter. She didn't bring up the restaurant as much when we were alone. She didn't say, "This is all for you" anymore. I think she realized how hollow that sounded now. My uncle, on the other hand, doubled down. "Must be nice," he'd mutter when I'd mention homework or my online classes. Some of us don't have the luxury of thinking only about ourselves. I stopped responding. It wasn't worth the fight every time. But I did notice something. Every time a payment went through, even if it was small, my mother would send a short message. "Sent. Got it in before midnight. We'll try to do more next month." She never said, "We shouldn't have to do this." She never said, "You're being unfair." She knew. They might never use the words, "We stole from you," but their actions were starting to admit it for them. Meanwhile, I realized something else. If I waited for them to pay the whole amount back before moving on with my life, I'd grow old in that restaurant. So I decided I couldn't wait. I picked up a second job at a small bookstore across town. No grease, no yelling from the kitchen, no one telling me, "We're family, stay late." Just shelves, customers who whispered instead of shouted, and a boss who paid me on time. The first time my paycheck hit, and I realized not 1 cent of it was emotionally manipulated out of me, I cried in my car. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the feeling. At night, I'd come home exhausted, split my earnings into 3 mental piles. Rent and basics, my own savings, a tuition fund that I started building myself, next to the slow repayments coming in. Those repayments weren't my only hope anymore. They were just one of the streams. The next turning point came at the end of the year. We'd made it through 12 payments. Some big, some tiny, a couple late, but they were there. My spreadsheet looked less like a brick wall, and more like a staircase. I had enough between my own savings and what they'd repaid to realistically start 1 semester at university if I did it carefully. If I took on some debt only I controlled. If I was willing to work my way through the rest. I didn't ask them. I didn't call a family meeting. I didn't send a group text. I applied. I got the acceptance. I paid the deposit with my own reclaimed and earned money. Then, on a quiet Thursday, I walked into the restaurant between lunch and dinner and slid my new student ID across the counter. I didn't say anything at first. My mother picked it up, squinted at it, then froze. You registered," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I start in the fall." She stared at the ID like it was some sacred artifact. "How?" she whispered. "Partly with what you're paying back," I said. "Partly with my own work. The way it should have been from the start." My uncle wandered over, wiped his hands on a towel, and glanced at the card. "So that's it then," he said. "You're just going to leave. Just like that." "Not just like that," I said. "You don't drain someone's future and then get shocked when they refuse to keep living the same way. I'm not abandoning you. I'm just stopping the bleeding." He scoffed. "You think a piece of paper makes you better than us?" "No," I said calmly. "I think it makes me separate from this. And that's what they wanted for me." My mother's eyes filled. "We're still going to pay," she said. "We're not going to stop just because you're going." "I know," I said. "And I appreciate it. But I want you to understand something." They both looked at me. "This," I said, tapping the ID, "is not a gift from you. It's not, we sacrificed so she could go. This is something I'm clawing back from a situation that never should have happened. This is me keeping the promise I made to them. Not repaying some debt to you." My mother nodded slowly. "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know." For a second, she looked less like the woman who'd signed away my money and more like the exhausted girl she probably once was, thrown into a business she never got to choose either. I didn't hug her. I didn't make a dramatic exit. I clocked in, worked my shift, clocked out. Then I left, not knowing that this was the last time I'd ever work there as their go-to person. University was strange. I was older than some of the freshmen, and my life experience was completely different. While they talked about prom and high school drama, my stories involved tax letters, equipment failures, and legal phrases like fiduciary duty. But I was there, sitting in actual classrooms, taking notes that weren't interrupted by someone yelling, "Table 8 needs refills," walking across a campus that smelled like trees and coffee, not grease. Every time I paid a bill, I'd look at the combination. My bookstore job, occasional freelancing, grants, and those monthly transfers from the restaurant. The thing that once represented betrayal was now being repurposed, piece by piece, into something useful. Of course, it wasn't clean. There were months the payment came late. There were months it came with strings attached. Can you pick up a few extra shifts? We're really strapped. We sent the money but we're short on staff. I said no. Gently. At first. Then firmly when they pushed. I can't keep giving more than what we agreed. I'd reply. That's how this happened in the first place. It wasn't an argument. It was a boundary. The big blow-up came over a holiday. It was my first semester away. I'd come home for a few days. The plan was simple. Dinner, catch up, go back. But nothing with this family stays simple. Around the table, someone made a joke about me living the high life at school. Bet those fancy professors don't make you scrub floors, my uncle said, smirking. You remember where you came from, right? I put my fork down. Yeah, I said. I remember exactly where I came from. I came from a place that took my college fund and called it saving the family. I came from a restaurant that ate my childhood, and then tried to eat my future. The table went silent. You're still holding that over us, he snapped. We're paying you back, aren't we? Yes, I said. And I appreciate that. But don't rewrite the story and act like you sent me to school out of kindness. You're not my benefactors. You're my debtors. That's the truth. Someone else at the table, an older cousin who'd mostly stayed out of it, finally spoke up. She's right, they said quietly. You guys messed up. You're making it right now. That's good. But you can't expect her to pretend it didn't happen. My uncle glared at them, then at me. My mother just stared at her plate. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to eat with my family and go back to my life. If this is going to turn into another guilt trip, I'll leave. No one said anything after that. We finished the meal in uneasy silence. Later that night, as I was putting my coat on by the door, my mother pulled me aside. You know he'll never admit it, she said. I know, I replied. He doesn't have to. The bank statements admit it for him. She winced. Then, after a long pause, she added, but I'm sorry. For my part in it. Not just the money. For all the times I made you feel like you owed us your life. That caught me off guard. She'd said sorry before, but it was always wrapped in excuses. This one wasn't. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. We hugged. It wasn't a magic fix. It didn't erase the past. But it was real. Years passed. Payments kept coming. Sometimes smaller, sometimes larger when business was better. The total in my spreadsheet crept closer to what that account should have been. I moved apartments. Took harder classes. Made friends who knew me as the person I was becoming. Not just the person I'd been trained to be. Every time an automatic notification popped up. Incoming transfer, $300. Incoming transfer, $500. I'd pause, look at it, and remember that night in the car when I thought everything was over. It wasn't over. It was changing. One day, long after I'd stopped counting months, I updated the spreadsheet and realized something. The remaining balance was small. A fraction of what it once was. I could see the finish line. I sat there for a long time, staring at the numbers. It wasn't about the last dollars anymore. It was about what the whole journey represented. That I hadn't rolled over when they crossed a line. That I'd respected myself enough to demand what was owed. That I'd turned we borrowed it into an actual enforceable truth. A few months later, the final payment hit. It wasn't dramatic. No message. No fanfare. Just another notification. Incoming transfer. $260. Note. Last one. I updated the spreadsheet. Watched the balance hit zero. And I cried again. Not the same crushed, hopeless crying from years before. This time, it felt cleaner. Like grief and relief mixed together. My grandparents had trusted me to fight if I had to. It took years. It took lawyers, spreadsheets, hard conversations, and a lot of uncomfortable family dinners. But I'd kept my promise. I didn't text them back some grand speech. I just replied, received. Then I closed the app, opened my laptop, and went back to my homework. Because in the end, that's the real victory. Not watching them suffer. Not burning bridges. Not some cinematic courtroom scene. The real revenge was sitting in a room that didn't smell like grease. Studying for a future they once tried to spend for themselves. I wasn't trapped in that restaurant anymore. I wasn't the kid who cried on the side of the road because her world collapsed. I was the woman who took her life back one payment, one boundary, one no at a time. If you're listening to this and thinking, my family did something like this, or, I keep being told to sacrifice my future for the greater good, hear this clearly. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to demand proof. You are allowed to protect what's yours, even from the people who raised you. That doesn't make you cruel. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you finally started caring about yourself. My family borrowed my inheritance to save their failing business. And I made them repay every cent. With interest. If this story hit a nerve, or reminded you of something you've been swallowing in silence, don't keep it inside. And if you want more stories where people stop letting family be used as an excuse to ruin their lives, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.